Velthar gripped the control panel as her ship shook violently. Red warning lights flashed everywhere, casting an angry glow across her blue-scaled face. The human interceptors had hit her engines perfectly, sending her advanced scout vessel spinning helplessly toward the brown desert planet below. "Stupid humans," she hissed through her gills, watching precious water droplets float away from the damaged life support system. Each drop that escaped was another second less of life. Her people, the Aquarians, needed constant moisture to survive. Without it, their gills would dry out and their skin would crack like old leather. The ship's computer spoke in a cold voice. "Water reserves at 12%. Estimated survival time, 3 hours, 14 minutes. Velthar slammed her webbed hand against the console. 3 hours. That was all she had left. She had been one of the fleet's best scouts, trained to gather information about enemy worlds and report back to the Aquarian command. Her mission was simple: find human weaknesses and prepare for invasion. But now she was falling toward their world like a burning rock. Through the cracked view screen, she could see the desert planet growing larger. It looked dead and empty, covered in endless sand dunes that stretched to every horizon. No oceans, no rivers, no lakes, just hot, dry death waiting for her below. The Aquarian Empire ruled over 17 star systems. They were proud, ancient, and powerful. Their cities floated on vast ocean worlds, with towers of living coral that reached toward the stars. They had technology that could reshape planets and weapons that could crack moons in half. Humans, on the other hand, were nothing. They had only recently crawled out of their single solar system like insects leaving a rotting log. The Aquarian military reports called them scavengers and primitive tool users. They had no real navy, no empire, and no respect from the other galactic powers. So why had their small patrol ships been so effective against her advanced scout vessel? Velthar tried not to think about it as her ship punched through the planet's atmosphere. The hull screamed as it heated up, and she could smell something burning. The automatic systems were trying to find a safe landing spot, but everything below looked equally deadly. She activated her emergency beacon, hoping her fleet would detect the signal and send a rescue team. But even if they came quickly, would they arrive in time? The desert heat would kill her long before dehydration finished the job. The ship hit the ground hard, sliding across the sand for several hundred meters before finally stopping against a large rock formation. Velthar was thrown forward against her restraints, tasting blood in her mouth. Her gills were already feeling dry from the ship's failing life support. She tried the communication system, but it was dead. The water recycler was making strange clicking sounds before it shut down completely. The hull was already getting hot from the planet's twin suns beating down on it. Velthar pulled herself out of the pilot's seat and stumbled to the emergency supply locker. Inside, she found one small water container, barely enough for 30 minutes of life. She held it carefully, knowing these might be the last drops of water she would ever taste. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly in every direction. No signs of life, no hope of rescue. Just sand, rocks, and the killing heat that would soon claim another victim from among the stars. Dr. Lee Hana wiped the sweat from her forehead as she knelt in the sand, carefully placing another soil sample into her collection bag. The desert was brutal today, even worse than usual. The twin suns hung overhead like angry eyes, baking everything below them into submission. She had been out here for 3 hours, gathering samples from different locations for her research team. They were studying how certain plants could survive in extreme conditions, hoping to find ways to help other worlds that had been damaged by war. It was slow, careful work, but Hannah loved it. Every grain of sand might hold secrets that could save lives somewhere else in the galaxy. That's when she saw the smoke. A thin black line rose from behind a rocky hill about 2 kilometers away. Hannah stood up, shading her eyes with her hand. Smoke meant fire, and fire in the desert usually meant trouble. She grabbed her field radio and tried to contact the research station, but the signal was weak this far out. Curiosity won over caution. Hannah packed her samples and started walking toward the smoke. As she climbed over the rocky hill, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. A spacecraft had crashed into the desert floor, its hull cracked open like a broken egg. steam, and smoke poured out of the wreckage. This wasn't a human ship. The design was all wrong, too smooth, with curves that seemed to flow like water. Strange symbols were carved into the hull, and the metal had a blue-green color she had never seen before. Hannah approached carefully. The war between humans and the Aquarian Empire had been going on for months, though most people called it more of a border dispute than a real war. Still, this could be an enemy vessel. She should probably call for backup and wait for the military to arrive. But then she heard something that changed everything. A weak, gasping sound coming from inside. The ship. Someone was alive in there. Hannah climbed through a crack in the hull, using her flashlight to navigate the dark interior. The air was thick and humid, like being inside a greenhouse. Strange equipment lined the walls, most of it sparking or completely destroyed. She found the pilot slumped over the controls. At first glance, Hannah thought it might be a human in some kind of environmental suit. But as she got closer, she realized this was something else entirely. The being had blue-scaled skin and what looked like gills on the sides of its neck. Those gills were moving very slowly, barely fluttering. The alien was dying. Hannah had studied enough biology to recognize the signs of severe dehydration. The creature's skin was cracked and dry, its breathing shallow and labored. Whatever this being was, it needed water immediately. She pulled out her water canteen, the one that contained her emergency supply for the long walk back to base. Without thinking twice, she knelt beside the alien and gently lifted its head. She poured a small amount of water directly onto its gills, watching as the dry tissue absorbed the moisture gratefully. The alien's eyes snapped open, revealing pupils that were a deep ocean blue. For a moment, they just stared at each other, human and alien, enemy and savior. Hannah offered the canteen again, and this time the alien drank deeply, its gills beginning to flutter with more strength. As color returned to its blue-scaled face, Hannah could see intelligence in those eyes, and something that looked very much like confusion. The alien tried to speak, making sounds that were like water flowing over rocks. Then it switched to broken, but understandable human language. "Why?" it whispered, looking at the canteen and then back at Hannah. "Why help enemy?" Hannah smiled gently, still holding the water. "Because you're dying, and I'm a doctor." That's reason enough. Getting Velthar back to the research station was harder than Hannah had expected. The alien was weak and could barely walk, leaning heavily on her shoulder as they made their way across the hot sand. Every few minutes, they had to stop so Velthar could drink more water and rest in whatever shade they could find. Just a little. Further, Hannah kept saying, though she wasn't entirely sure herself. The research station looked tiny from this distance, like a small metal dot against the endless desert. But it was their only hope. When they finally reached the station, Kim Day was working in the greenhouse, carefully tending to rows of experimental plants. He looked up in shock as Hannah stumbled through the door, supporting a blue-scaled alien who was clearly not human. "Hannah, what in the world?" Kim started to say, but she cut him off. "Medical emergency first, questions later," she said firmly. "This being is severely dehydrated. We need to get it to the medical bay now." Kim didn't argue. He had worked with Hannah for 3 years and trusted her judgment completely. Together, they helped Velthar onto one of the medical beds in their small treatment room. Over the next hour, they worked to stabilize their unexpected patient. Kim turned out to be surprisingly good at alien biology, figuring out how to set up an IV system that could deliver fluids directly to Velthar's bloodstream. Meanwhile, Hannah rigged up a humidifier to keep the air around the alien moist. "The gills are the key," Kim explained, as he adjusted the equipment. "They work like fish gills, but more advanced. If we can keep them wet and the air humid, the dehydration should reverse itself." Velthar watched everything they did with suspicious eyes. Even while accepting their help, the alien seemed to be studying them, looking for weaknesses or hidden motives. This was clearly a warrior, not a diplomat. As Velthar recovered strength, Hannah decided to show their patient around the station. Maybe understanding their work would help build trust. The research station was small but well organized. There was the medical bay where they had treated Velthar, a communications room, living quarters for the 6-person team, and the pride of the facility, a large greenhouse where they conducted their experiments. This is what we do, Hannah explained, leading Velthar through rows of plants growing in specially treated desert soil. We're trying to figure out how to make dead worlds green again. Velthar stopped at a table where Kim was working with seedlings. These weren't ordinary plants. They had been genetically modified to survive in extreme conditions. Some could grow with very little water. Others could actually pull moisture from the air. A few could even break down toxic soil and make it safe for other plants. I don't understand, Velthar said slowly, touching one of the leaves with a webbed finger. Your people are at war with my empire. Why do you grow plants instead of weapons? Kim looked up from his work with a gentle smile. Because the galaxy has enough weapons already. What it needs is more gardens. Velthar's confusion deepened as the team showed more of their projects. They had developed new irrigation systems that could work on planets with no natural water sources. They had created soil treatments that could turn poisoned ground into fertile farmland. They even had plans for atmospheric processors that could slowly change a planet's climate over several decades. But this takes so long, Velthar protested. Decades, maybe centuries. If you want to control territory, why not just take it by force? Your military could conquer and move on to the next target. Hannah exchanged a look with Kim. We're not trying to conquer anything, she said quietly. We're trying to heal worlds that have been hurt by war. Some of these planets used to have thriving civilizations before they were destroyed in conflicts. Destroyed by who? Velthar asked. Does it matter? Kim replied. What matters is that refugees from those worlds need somewhere safe to live. We're creating those safe places. Velthar walked slowly through the greenhouse, processing this information. In all her military training, she had never encountered a strategy like this. The Aquarian Empire conquered through superior technology and overwhelming force. They took what they wanted and eliminated resistance. But these humans were doing something completely different. They were playing a game Velthar didn't understand, with rules that made no sense to a warrior's mind. The warning came at dawn when Park Nari was checking the weather monitoring equipment. She burst into the main lab where everyone was having breakfast, her face pale with worry. We have a problem, she announced, holding up her tablet. A massive sandstorm is heading straight for us. It'll hit in about 6 hours. Kim Day nearly choked on his coffee. How massive are we talking? Category 5. Winds up to 200 kilometers per hour. It's going to last at least 12 hours, maybe longer. Nari pulled up the satellite images, showing a wall of brown sand that stretched across half the continent. This is the biggest storm I've seen in 3 years of working here. Hannah looked at the images with growing concern. What about our water collection systems? Can they survive winds that strong? The research station depended entirely on its water collection systems to survive in the desert. They had solar condensers that pulled moisture from the air, wind-powered, pumps that reached underground water sources, and a complex network of pipes and storage tanks. Without them, the team would die of thirst within days. That's the problem, Nari said grimly. The condensers are designed to handle normal desert winds, not hurricane-force storms. If we lose them, we're in serious trouble. Velthar had been listening quietly from the corner, still recovering from her ordeal. Now she spoke up with a question that surprised everyone. How much water do you have in storage right now? About 2 weeks' worth for the full team, Kim answered. Why? Because if your collection systems fail, 2 weeks won't be enough time for rescue ships to reach you. The storm will disrupt communications, and the sand will make landing impossible for days after it passes. The humans looked at each other nervously. They hadn't thought of that. Wait, Hannah said suddenly. Velthar, your people are aquatic, right? You must know a lot about water collection and management systems. Velthar nodded slowly. Every Aquarian child learns water engineering before they can swim properly. It's necessary for survival on ships and hostile worlds. Could you help us? Nari asked hopefully. Maybe there's something we haven't thought of. For a moment Velthar hesitated. These were technically her enemies. If their water systems failed, and they died, it would be one less human research facility to worry about. The logical thing for an Aquarian warrior would be to let nature take its course. But she remembered Hannah giving her water when she was dying. She remembered Kim working for hours to save her life. These humans had shown her kindness when they could have left her to die in the desert. Show me your systems. she said finally. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Velthar studied the human water collection equipment, her trained eye spotting weaknesses and inefficiencies that the human engineers had missed. Her knowledge of fluid dynamics was far more advanced than anything the research team had learned. Your condensers. Positioned wrong, she explained to Nari as they worked together on the roof. They're fighting against the natural air currents instead of working with them. Working side by side, they began to redesign the entire collection network. Velthar showed them how to create emergency condensation traps using materials from her crashed ship. The alien metal was incredibly efficient at collecting moisture from the air, even in extreme conditions. We need to create wind channels, Velthar explained, her hands moving quickly as she adjusted pipes and valves. Instead of letting the storm destroy your equipment, we can use its power to drive more water into your storage tanks. Park Nari watched in amazement as the alien worked. This is incredible. Why didn't we think of this before? Because you think like land dwellers, Velthar replied, not unkindly. My people live on ocean worlds where every drop of fresh water is precious. We've had thousands of years to perfect these techniques. As the storm approached, the team worked frantically to implement Velthar's improvements. They rerouted pipes, repositioned collectors, and built emergency backup systems using salvaged parts from the crashed Aquarian ship. When the wall of sand finally hit the station, they were as ready as they could be. The sandstorm raged for 14 hours, battering the research station with winds that sounded like screaming demons. Velthar spent most of that time in the communications room, monitoring the makeshift water collection systems she had helped design. To everyone's amazement, they were working perfectly, even better than the original setup. Water levels are actually increasing, she reported to Hannah during one of the brief calm periods. Your storage tanks will be completely full by the time this storm passes. When the winds finally died down, the entire team was exhausted but grateful to be alive. The station had survived, and they now had enough water to last for months instead of weeks. But Velthar found herself unable to sleep. Her mind kept turning over everything she had learned about these strange humans. While the others rested, she made her way to the main computer terminal. Her technical training allowed her to access most of the station's basic systems, though she was careful not to trigger any security alarms. She told herself she was just curious about human technology, but deep down she knew she was looking for something more important. She was looking for the truth. The first files she found were exactly what she expected: research data about desert plants, soil composition studies, and climate analysis reports. Standard scientific work that matched what the humans had told her. But as she dug deeper into the database, she began to find references to something called Operation Green Sanctuary. The name was mentioned in dozens of reports, but always in passing, as if everyone already knew what it meant. Velthar's curiosity grew stronger. She used her knowledge of Aquarian computer systems to trace the data connections, following digital breadcrumbs that led to increasingly classified files. What she found there changed everything. She thought she knew about humanity. Operation Green Sanctuary wasn't just about studying desert reclamation. It was a massive galaxy-wide project that had been running in secret for over 20 years. Humans had been quietly identifying dead or dying worlds throughout known space. Planets that had been destroyed by war, poisoned by industrial disasters, or abandoned after their resources were exhausted. Then they were fixing them. The scope was incredible. Velthar found records of 47 different worlds where human teams were working to restore damaged ecosystems. Some projects involved cleaning up toxic waste left behind by mining operations. Others focused on reintroducing plant and animal life to planets that had been stripped bare by orbital bombardments. But the most shocking discovery was still to come. As Velthar read through the project files, she began to see patterns in the data. Many of these dead worlds had been destroyed during conflicts involving the major galactic powers, including her own Aquarian empire. The humans weren't just randomly helping damaged planets. They were specifically targeting worlds that had been hurt by the same wars they were supposedly fighting. She found detailed reports about Kepler 442b, an ocean world that had been poisoned during an Aquarian mining operation 15 years ago. The native population, a peaceful species called the Genti, had been forced to evacuate when their seas turned toxic. Most galactic powers had written them off as extinct, but the humans had found them. Not only had they found the scattered Genti refugees, they had spent 8 years slowly cleaning up their homeworld. The project was nearly complete, and soon the Genti would be able to return to their restored ocean paradise. Velthar's hands trembled as she read the files. Her own empire had poisoned that world. She remembered the incident being mentioned in military briefings as an acceptable loss during resource extraction operations. The Aquarian High Command had never given the Genti a second thought. The pattern repeated itself across dozens of worlds. Species displaced by Aquarian expansion, projects, civilizations destroyed during border conflicts with other empires, refugees scattered across the galaxy with nowhere to go, and in every case the humans had quietly stepped in to help. They weren't building an empire. They weren't conquering territory or gathering resources for themselves. They were healing the wounds that other civilizations, including Velthar's own people, had inflicted on the galaxy. The most devastating file was labeled Casualty Assessment, Ongoing Galactic Conflicts. It contained detailed statistics about the wars currently raging across known space. The numbers were staggering. Billions of beings displaced, hundreds of worlds damaged or destroyed, entire species driven to the edge of extinction. At the bottom of the report was a simple statement that hit Velthar like a physical blow. Current galactic conflicts, including the Aquarian-human border dispute, are preventing effective humanitarian operations in 23% of target systems. Recommend immediate ceasefire negotiations to allow continued refugee assistance. Velthar sat back in her chair, staring at the screen in shock. The war between her people and the humans wasn't about territory or resources at all. From the human perspective, it was just an obstacle preventing them from saving more lives. Her entire understanding of this conflict had been wrong. The next morning, Velthar couldn't hide her discovery any longer. She found Choi Jun, the station chief, sitting alone in the small cafeteria, drinking coffee and reading reports on his tablet. He was an older man, with kind eyes and graying hair, the sort of person who seemed to carry the weight of many responsibilities on his shoulders. "I know about Operation Green Sanctuary," Velthar said quietly, sitting down across from him. June looked up from his tablet, not seeming surprised. "I figured you might find it eventually. You're clearly intelligent, and our security isn't designed to keep out someone with your technical skills." "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Would you have believed us if we had?" June replied with a small smile. "Sometimes people need to discover the truth for themselves before they can accept it." Velthar leaned forward across the table. "I read about the Genti homeworld restoration and the Kalari refugee settlements, and the atmospheric processes on New Cygnus Prime. How is this possible? How can your people afford to do all this without asking for anything in return?" June set down his coffee cup and considered his words carefully. "What do you know about human history, Velthar?" "Very little. My people's intelligence reports focus on military capabilities, not culture. We spent thousands of years fighting each other on our home planet," June explained. "Wars over territory, resources, religion, politics. We nearly destroyed ourselves, several times. But eventually we learned something important. Cooperation is always more effective than conquest in the long run." He pulled up a holographic display from his tablet, showing a map of local space, with dozens of colored dots representing different star systems. "When we finally made it to the stars, we found a galaxy that was making the same mistakes we had made. Powerful civilizations fighting over resources, destroying worlds, displacing entire species. We realized we could either join that cycle of violence or try to break it." Velthar studied the map. "These dots, they represent refugee settlements?" 17 species so far, June confirmed. "The Genti you read about are just one example. We've got the Silari growing crystal gardens on restored desert worlds. The Vorthak have underwater cities in the polar seas of Kepler 638c. The Menari are rebuilding their tree cities on New Forest Prime." "But why?" Velthar pressed. "What do humans gain from this?" Every civilization in the galaxy seeks advantage over others. Resources, territory, strategic positions. You're giving these things away for free. June was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the desert that surrounded their small station. In the distance, small green shoots were already beginning to emerge from the sand, seeds that had been watered by the storm they had survived together. "Have you ever planted a garden, Velthar?" he asked finally. "My people live on ocean worlds. We don't grow plants. When you plant a garden, you don't expect the plants to pay you back. You don't demand that the flowers give you tribute or that the vegetables serve in your army. You plant them because life is precious and because watching things grow makes the universe a little more beautiful." Velthar shook her head. That's not how civilizations work. There are always costs, always competition for resources. "There are," June agreed, "but there's also abundance, if you know how to create it instead of just taking it. Every world we restore becomes more productive. Every species we help eventually becomes strong enough to help others. The Genti are already working with us to clean up 3 other ocean worlds. The Silari have developed new crystal-growing techniques that we're sharing with mining refugees on the outer rim." The conversation was interrupted by a sudden beeping sound from Velthar's emergency beacon. She looked down in surprise. The device had been silent for days, its signal blocked by the storm and the interference from her damaged ship. Now it was flashing steadily, indicating that it had made contact with an Aquarian rescue vessel. "Your people are coming," June observed calmly. Velthar stared at the beacon, her mind racing. A few days ago she would have been overjoyed by this signal. Rescue meant returning to her fleet, reporting on human activities, and continuing her military career. She was a scout and warrior of the Aquarian Empire, after all. But now, knowing what she knew about Operation Green Sanctuary and humanity's true goals, the beacon felt more like a countdown timer. When her people arrived, they would expect a full intelligence report. They would want to know about human military capabilities, defensive positions, and strategic weaknesses. They would also expect her to identify this research station as a target for destruction. "What will you do?" June asked gently. Velthar looked around the small cafeteria where she had shared meals with people who had saved her life. Through the windows, she could see Hana and Kim working in the greenhouse, tending to plants that might someday feed refugees from distant worlds. Park Nari was on the roof, maintaining the water collection systems that Velthar herself had helped improve. "Life finds a way when given the chance," she repeated June's earlier words. "Is that really what you believe?" "It's what I've seen," he replied, "every single time." The beacon continued its steady beeping, each pulse bringing her rescue closer, and forcing her to choose between the warrior she had always been and the person she was becoming. The Aquarian ships appeared in the desert sky like dark clouds, their sleek hulls gleaming blue-green in the afternoon sun. 3 vessels, a rescue transport flanked by 2 military escorts. Velthar watched them descend from the station's observation deck, her heart pounding with conflicting emotions. "They're beautiful ships," Hana said quietly, standing beside her. The entire research team had gathered to watch the arrival, their faces tense with worry. "They're warships," Velthar corrected, though her voice lacked its usual military pride. "The escorts are attack cruisers. They're not just here to rescue me." Choi Jun joined them at the window. "What will you tell them about us?" Before Velthar could answer, her communicator crackled to life. A familiar voice spoke in the flowing Aquarian language. Commander Thales, her former superior and mentor. "Scout Velthar, this is extraction. Team Alpha, we have locked onto your beacon. Prepare for immediate retrieval." Velthar activated her communicator with trembling fingers. "Commander, I'm glad to hear your voice. Are you injured? Our sensors show you've been in contact with human forces." "I crashed, sir. The humans, they provided medical assistance." There was a pause on the other end. "Understood. We'll deal with them appropriately. Stand clear of the facility. We're going to eliminate the threat before extraction." The words hit Velthar like ice water. "Sir, what threat? This is just a research station. Intelligence indicates it's a military observation post. Our mission is to neutralize it and extract you. Standard protocol." Velthar looked around at the humans who had saved her life. Kim was still holding a data pad showing his latest plant growth experiments. Park Nari had soil under her fingernails from working in the greenhouse. Hana was clutching her medical kit, ready to help even in this crisis. These weren't soldiers, they were gardeners, just like June had said. "Commander," Velthar said carefully, "I need to provide a full debriefing before any action is taken. There are complications." "Negative, Scout. We have our orders. Clear the area immediately. Weapon systems are charging." Through the window, Velthar could see the escort ships positioning themselves for an attack run. Their weapons arrays were already glowing with deadly energy. In less than 2 minutes, they would reduce the research station to burning metal and scattered dreams. "I can't let them do this," she whispered to herself. "What?" Hana asked, but Velthar was already moving. She ran to the communications console and began typing rapidly, her fingers flying over the controls. If she could just access the ship's targeting systems, there. Her scout code still worked, giving her limited access to the attack cruiser's networks. "Velthar, what are you doing?" Choi Jun asked urgently. "Something that will probably get me executed for treason," she replied, initiating an emergency shutdown of the weapons systems on both escort ships. Alarms immediately began blaring from her communicator. "Scout Velthar, you are interfering with military operations. Explain yourself immediately." Velthar took a deep breath and activated the station's external communications array. When she spoke, her voice was broadcast not just to the ships above, but to the entire Aquarian fleet monitoring the rescue operation. "This is Scout Velthar, reporting from the Human Research Facility. I am declaring this location a protected humanitarian site under Galactic Convention Article 12. The silence that followed was deafening. "Have you lost your mind?" Commander Thales's voice was sharp with disbelief. "That's a human military installation." "No, sir, it's not." Velthar began transmitting the files she had discovered about Operation Green Sanctuary. "I'm sending you the complete database records. This facility is part of a refugee assistance program. The humans are not building weapons here. They're growing food for displaced populations." "Impossible." "Our intelligence clearly indicates—" "Your intelligence is wrong," Velthar interrupted, something she had never done in her entire military career. "Sir, I have spent 4 days with these people. I have seen their work. They saved my life, and they're saving the lives of countless others across the galaxy. Species that we displaced, worlds that we damaged." She could hear heated discussions in the background, multiple voices arguing in rapid Aquarian. The rescue operation was clearly not going according to plan. "Velthar," Thales said finally, his voice cold and formal, "you are relieved of duty. Pending a full investigation, you will be extracted immediately for psychological evaluation." "I'm not leaving," she replied quietly. "That's not a request, Scout. That's an order." Velthar looked around at the humans who were watching her with growing understanding. They couldn't follow the Aquarian conversation, but they could see what she was doing. She was choosing them over her own people. "I formally request asylum," she said into the communicator. "I am defecting to the Human Refugee Assistance Program." The explosion of angry voices from the ships above was immediate and furious, but Velthar had made her choice. She turned off the communicator and faced the humans who had become her friends. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "This is going to get complicated." Outside, the Aquarian ships held their position, weapons powered down but ready. The standoff had begun. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. For 20 minutes, the Aquarian ships hovered motionless above the research station, while heated arguments raged over their communication channels. Velthar had left the speakers on, and even though the humans couldn't understand the flowing water-like language, they could hear the anger and confusion in the voices. "What are they saying?" Hana asked, her medical training making her focus. On Velthar's obvious stress. "They're deciding whether to arrest me or execute me," Velthar replied matter-of-factly. "Some of them want to destroy this place and take me back in chains. Others are reading the files I transmitted and asking questions about what they found." Kim Day was pacing nervously by the greenhouse entrance. "Can they really start shooting at us? I thought there were laws about attacking civilian research facilities." "There are," Choi Jun said grimly, but those laws only matter if both sides agree to follow them. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the chatter on the Aquarian channels. Younger, more uncertain than Commander Thales. "This is Lieutenant Kexara aboard the escort vessel Tidebreaker. I finished reviewing the transmitted files. Commander, these humans aren't building weapons. They're growing food. For the Minari refugees from the Proxima incident, Velthar's..." Head snapped up. Kexara is young, but she's not stupid. She was part of the Proxima operation that displaced the Minari population. "Scout Velthar," came Thalas's voice, tight with barely controlled fury. "You will cease this interference immediately and report for extraction. That's a direct order." "I can't do that, sir," Velthar replied, her voice growing stronger. "I took an oath to serve the Aquarian people, but I'm serving them better by stopping this attack than I would by following orders blindly." She turned to the humans. "I need to broadcast something. Can your communication system reach the entire Aquarian fleet?" "What are you thinking?" June asked. "I'm thinking it's time to tell the truth to more than just the ships above us." Working quickly, Velthar and Parknari rigged the station's communication array to broadcast on all standard Aquarian military frequencies. When they were ready, Velthar took a deep breath and began speaking to her people. Not just the rescue team, but the thousands of Aquarian warriors spread across this sector of space. "This is Scout Velthar, reporting on Operation Green Sanctuary. For the past 4 days I have observed human activities at this research facility. What I found contradicts everything we've been told about human military intentions." She began transmitting not just the files she had discovered, but live video feeds from the research station. The cameras showed Kim working with his experimental plants, Hannah treating Velthar's injuries, the greenhouse full of crops designed to feed refugees. "These humans are not our enemies," she continued. "They are healers. They have spent 20 years quietly repairing the damage caused by galactic conflicts, including damage caused by our own expansion operations." The response was immediate and explosive. Multiple voices began shouting over the communication channels, some in support of Velthar, others demanding her immediate arrest. But she kept talking, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I have seen records of 47 worlds being restored. 17 species have been given new homes. The Genti are returning to their cleansed ocean world. The Silari have new crystal gardens. The Minari have forests again. All of this paid for by human resources, asking nothing in return except the chance to preserve life." "Lies!" Commander Thalas's voice cracked like a whip. "Human propaganda designed to weaken our resolve." But Lieutenant Kexara's voice came back, stronger now. "Sir, I'm looking at the data myself. The Minari settlement records match our own refugee tracking systems. These humans really did find homes for the populations we displaced. That's when everything went wrong." "All ships. This is Admiral Vorhan aboard the Fleet Command vessel," a new voice announced. "We have a situation developing. Some vessels are questioning their orders. This appears to be a coordinated psychological operation by the humans." Velthar's blood ran cold. Admiral Vorhan was known for his ruthless efficiency and his hatred of anything that questioned military authority. "All ships will focus fire on the research facility immediately," Vorhan continued. "Any vessel that refuses to engage will be considered compromised and dealt with accordingly." For a moment, there was silence. Then Lieutenant Kexara's voice came through, shaky but determined. "Sir, I cannot in good conscience fire on a refugee assistance facility. I am standing down weapons systems. Kexara, you are relieved of command. Security teams will board your vessel immediately." "Belay that order," came another voice, Captain Nalies from the second escort ship. "I've reviewed the data as well. We're not destroying a humanitarian facility, not today." What happened next would be remembered as the moment the Aquarian civil war began. Admiral Vorhan's command ship opened fire, not on the human research station, but on Lieutenant Kexara's vessel for refusing orders. The young officer's ship exploded in a ball of blue flame that lit up the desert sky. Captain Nal S immediately returned fire, and suddenly the sky above the research station became a battlefield as Aquarian ships turned their weapons on each other. 6 months later, Velthar knelt in what had once been empty desert, her webbed hands carefully planting seedlings in soil that now held enough moisture to support life. The morning sun was still harsh, but shade cloth stretched overhead provided relief, and the sound of water flowing through irrigation channels filled the air with a music she had never heard before. "How are the root systems developing?" Hannah asked, crouching beside her with a tablet full of growth measurements. "Better than expected," Velthar replied, gently brushing sand away from a young plant's base. "The symbiotic fungi we introduced last month are helping the roots spread deeper. These plants should be able to survive on their own within another few weeks." It still amazed her sometimes, this careful, patient work of coaxing life from barren ground. Her old military training had focused on quick strikes, overwhelming force, and immediate results. But terraforming required a completely different mindset. You planted seeds knowing you might not see the full forest for decades. You built water systems that would serve people you'd never meet. You worked for the future instead of just the present. The desert around the research station was unrecognizable now. What had been empty sand dunes were becoming rolling hills covered with drought-resistant grasses. Small groves of trees provided shelter for the growing community of researchers, engineers, and refugees who had come to help with the terraforming project. "The first transport arrives tomorrow," Hannah said, checking her schedule. 15 Genti families ready to start the aquaculture project in the new reservoir. Velthar smiled, thinking about the large artificial lake they had spent months creating in the valley beyond the hills. The Genti were master aquatic farmers, and they had volunteered to help establish fish populations that could eventually feed the growing settlement. It was a perfect example of how Operation Green Sanctuary worked, refugees using their skills to help build new homes for other displaced peoples. "Have you heard from Captain Nales lately?" Hannah asked. "Last week. Her fleet is holding the outer colonies. The civil war is complicated." Velthar's expression grew sad when she talked about her home empire. The conflict that had started over her broadcast was still raging, with traditional military forces fighting against progressive factions who wanted to change Aquarian policies toward other species. "Do you regret it? Starting all this?" Velthar considered the question as she moved to the next planting spot. Around them, other workers were busy with their own tasks. Kim Day testing soil composition, Park Nari adjusting solar panels, Choi Jun meeting with a group of Silari engineers who had come to help design crystal-based water purification systems. "I regret that people are dying because of choices I made," she said finally, "but I don't regret making those choices. Too many wars have been fought because good people stayed silent when they should have spoken up." The sound of approaching vehicles made them both look up. A convoy of human transport trucks was making its way across the desert, carrying supplies and new volunteers for the terraforming project. Velthar recognized some of the vehicles. They were bringing more of the specialized water recycling equipment that had proven so effective in the harsh environment. "You know what I find funny?" Hannah said, waving at the approaching convoy. "When I first found you in that crashed ship, I thought I was just saving one person. I never imagined it would lead to all this." Velthar looked around at the growing oasis, the thriving community, the proof that enemies could become friends when they work toward common goals. One person can make a difference, but it takes many people working together to change the world. As the convoy arrived, refugees and volunteers from a dozen different species began unloading equipment and supplies. Velthar watched a young Menari child help carry solar panels while chatting excitedly with a human engineer. She saw Genti adults examining the irrigation channels with obvious approval. She noticed Silari craftspeople already discussing improvements to the water collection systems. This was what the galaxy could look like, she realized. Not empires fighting over territory, but different peoples sharing knowledge and resources to build something better together. It wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still misunderstandings, still the ongoing civil war among her own people. But it was hope made real. "Come on," Hannah said, standing up and dusting off her hands. "We have work to do." The afternoon. Planting shift starts in an hour, and I want to finish the new greenhouse section before the Genti families arrive tomorrow. Velthar rose to follow her friend, pausing for a moment to look back at the small plants they had just placed in the formerly lifeless soil. In a few months, those seeds would be sturdy young trees. In a few years, they would provide shade and shelter for families building new lives. In a few decades, they would be part of a forest that stretched to the horizon. She had once been a warrior serving an empire built on conquest and dominance. Now she was a gardener, helping to plant the seeds of a different kind of future, one where strength meant helping others grow rather than keeping them down. The desert that had nearly killed her had become her home, and she couldn't imagine being anywhere else.